Hey folks, Randy Arsenault here with Red Friday Talks. I'm going to talk about something which can be very sensitive to police officers and firefighters and paramedics, anybody in emergency services, really, first responders. And it's controversial. It's very, very difficult to talk about. And it's something that they're asked about all the time. And here joining me today is Dave Connor from Red Friday Talks. Dave, how you doing today, bud?
Great to see you, Randy. I'm well, thank you.
One of the most common questions that a police officer, and I have to speak on behalf of police officers, but I know this happens with others, on whether it's on social media or when you're running interviews, one of the most common questions is, what's the worst thing you've ever seen as a police officer? People want to know. It's that sensationalism. And the people that want to know are, the people that are asking the questions often are people who want to get into emergency services, become police officers or, firefighters, first responders, but also just the general public because they see things on TV. What's the
Because
worst
yeah,
thing you've ever seen?
yeah, yeah.
And we're going to talk about this today because what people don't realize, it's an innocent enough question, is listen, we sometimes spend years or the rest of our lives trying to forget
Exactly.
the worst thing that we've
It's
seen or the
totally
worst thing
true.
that we've experienced.
Totally true. Yeah,
And
yeah.
Dave, what do you think about that? We're going to go back and forth, but what's
Oh
your
yeah.
initial
Well,
thought?
that's quite an onion. Let's peel away at it. It's
Yeah.
like the framing of that. It reminds me of guys who were raised by abusive fathers. A monster of a father. I always say they spend the second half of their life trying to get over the first half of their life. And
Yeah.
when we talk about things like trauma exposures, people have to recognize that the public safety sector, first responders, we respond in the course of a career to literally hundreds of traumatic incidents, hundreds of them, not
Right.
half a dozen of them, hundreds of them. And you build up, I will say, a tolerance for it in some respects. And in other ways, it is our humanity and our decency that drove us to this kind of work. And you can't experience cruelty and suffering without being injured by it. So when someone asks that question, I just assume it's out of ignorance. The fact that it borders on cruelty, it's just people being
Yeah.
dumb. I don't. What I don't do is answer that question. I'll speak in however interested they are in knowing why we don't want to talk about it. I might do that, but normally I say, I don't go down that road. I'll tell you the funniest story I ever saw, though, and that
Yeah.
seems
Good one.
to circle it back to something that allows you to have a conversation with. I've had PTSD for 35 years. I have been in trauma. Or sorry, I was in treatment for quite a while. I co-facilitated a PTS support group with my friend Gary, who I hope you'll interview one day. It's very, very true that the stuff that we do or are simply exposed to, let me just take a left here
Yeah.
for a second.
Yeah.
You look at a famous chap with PTS was our Canadian General Romeo Dallaire. Okay, his PTS did not come from what he did. It came from what he saw
Yeah.
as a blue helmet peacekeeper with the rules of engagement that wouldn't allow him to stop the things that he was looking at.
Right.
And that the moral injury that comes from that, and we can do a whole unit on moral injury. The moral injury that comes from that makes it very, very difficult to get over what you've seen and what you've watched other people do. It's you know
Right.
it's one of those sort of things that I don't think we express it enough to new people to that they should expect that this thing is going to take chunks out of them if they're
Yeah.
decent people. I mean, if you look at the spectrum of humanity, the the best guys for this kind of work, guys and girls, are sociopaths, right? They're
Yeah. I,
disconnected to the pain of others. They're deeply bonded to their own unit. Those guys would be great at that. I've met a couple on the job. They tend not to make it through the intake and the training part. But you can't be a person. I guess we'll say that you can't be a person and be unaffected by this kind of work. For the most part, it shortens careers, and we say in the PTS world that the biggest casualty of PTSD is not someone's career or their revenue or their income or promotions. It's the deepest, most personal relationships that they have at home. Those things are destroyed because of this thing.
right. I was watching an interview just a couple of days ago, and this is from the U.S., and it had to do with military personnel and CIA and such. And they were talking about some of the best agents or who would make the best agents. And it's funny that you mentioned the sociopath because they would actually look for people with
Hmm.
sociopathic, if that's the right word, tendencies,
Yeah,
but who don't act on it, but who have the thoughts and have the feelings, but just
sure.
don't
Yeah,
act on that. So,
isn't that fascinating? Eh?
yeah,
Isn't
yeah, and
that
it is.
interesting?
Now, we only discussed this topic briefly before starting this recording because conversations on the fly they're more from the heart.
Yeah.
But you brought something up, and I wonder if you could expand. And I appreciate you expanding on it because you're not from the policing world. You're from the
Hmm.
firefighter world, and of course, me coming from the policing world, you may have a deeper understanding or a different point of view. But police officers and firefighters attending the same scene because we know first responders all have a tendency to they attend the same scene, however experience the PTSD or the ongoing effects, I should say, differently after. And part
Do
of that has to do with the investigations, the legal aspects, or the implications that police have to deal with for
Mhm.
months or years afterwards. I wonder
Yeah,
if you
and
could.
also going back to the Romeo Dayer thing is, if police are at a scene that, let's just say, well, we can spend some time on this. Um, there's a concept of shifting lead agency. So at say in the 9/11 attacks on the towers, okay, those planes hit, and for the next day or so, that was a fire and rescue operation.
Right,
The day after that, it became once they recognized, of course, it's a crime scene. It became a police operation with fire and rescue people in support of police, so they didn't mess up the evidence and stuff, right? Like,
right,
and that
right,
sort of happens. And so if you look at police responding to scenes in big cities, right? There's going to be scenes where they are the absolute, no question about it, lead agency, but they're not at fires. And while there's a rescue going on, they're not the lead agency in MVCs. So a lot of times, I think one of the things that is hard for police is to stand and watch stuff and not have the training or the ability to act the way they're watching firefighters. I mean, I don't. They might watch firefighters go into burning buildings and think, "Geez, I wish I could do that." I've never heard a cop say that, but you get what I'm saying, right? The
listen,
your ability to act is hampered by your role, and I think
right.
that is very, very difficult for good people. It's the car goes off the dock and goes into the lake. Well, you're not allowed to jump in the lake. You're not trained to jump in the
I'm
lake.
gonna I gotta throw a wrench into what you're saying here because we need to add some comedy every now and then. And for some reason, this came to mind when you're talking about police and fire, their roles at calls and preserving evidence and such. Do you know how many calls I've attended where the police are in fact looking to preserve evidence, or at least we're in the initial stages, and the
Yeah.
firefighters come out with
Oh
their
yeah.
hoses and they got axes and they're smashing the door in and they got water all over the place and they're crashing things and
Oh
let me
yeah.
tell you, I mean, of course you're doing your job and hats off to you, but everything that fire departments do, they're almost coming in like a wrecking ball
Yeah.
to get done what they need to do, and then they take off and police are stuck thinking, okay, how do what are we supposed to do? We got to preserve this evidence here.
Yeah, no, it's an ongoing joke. I was for the
Yeah.
bulk of my career while I was a fireman and a captain. I think I've said before, I was a command chief for the last 12 years of my life. So that's the white helmet fire ground command guy, right? That you see on the TV and stuff,
Cool.
and in the news. And I was a captain before that. In the fire service, you can't be you can't be an operations chief if you weren't a captain on a truck. It's a rule.
Okay.
You can be a staff chief, but you have to come through the operations end to be a command chief. So
Interesting.
before that, I spent most of my career. I was 13 years on one of those heavy rescue squads, the Jaws of Life crowd. Right, was
Right.
the
Right.
funnest place to be a fireman because you got to go all the places and do all the interesting stuff. And if there was fires, you got to go to them as well. But
That's cool.
that was one of the things that they call them special accident investigation tribe and Peel Police. We used to have them hopping like scalded roosters, and they called us the evidence eradication team because by the time we were done with the car, they didn't know who was sitting where. And one of the one of the things they begged us, they, please, something you need to do in an auto extrication is stabilize the vehicle.
Yeah.
You can't have people with suspected spinal injuries and have everybody stomping on the car and pulling on chairs and on seats and yanking roofs off and torquing into doors and stuff. So you got to stabilize the vehicle. one of the ways you do that, you'll see it, you see it if you even drive by it. You'll put heavy hardwood cribbing underneath the car, and sort of like acting like a snowshoe, you sort of spread the weight out underneath the four corners of the car so the thing stays still. That's
Interesting.
stabilization, right? One of the things we used to do was just grab a pair of vice grips and yank the valve stems out of the car, out of the tires. So you
Interesting.
yank them out, and the car goes, and it sits right on its oil pan, perfectly stable.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the evidence eradication team, that was what we were doing, and the cops are going, "We're trying to investigate this thing,
Yeah.
and you're letting the air out of the tires of a car that's the at-fault driver, you bunch of ninnies." So
Yeah.
it, it's kind of an ongoing thing. I mean, I think we try a little harder not to wreck the scenes like that. But again, that's back to the point of who's the lead agency, right? The lead agency in a fire is fire, and they're going to do fire stuff. And
Yeah.
there's really no
Sure.
way around that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason why everybody ends up at the same calls is because, well, there's many different reasons, but there are investigations that need to take place. And I'm just going to give a quick example. If there's a medical call or an unknown medical call, there might be fire and paramedics, of course, are going to show up and do their best to protect life, and police as well, of course, CPR, whatever needs to get done.
Mhm.
But there may be an investigation required
Oh, sure, yeah. The chances.
as
I
to
mean,
what
I've
took
I've
place.
been
Yeah.
in. We don't usually know it at the time. I've probably been to half a dozen murder scenes, homicide scenes,
Yeah.
without realizing that's what they were.
Right. Exactly.
I was at one that we thought for years was an accident, and found out later through a fire marshal investigator that somebody confessed to it. So, you're. I don't want to say everything, but almost everything that requires a full response has a law enforcement or criminal implication. Like the setting of fires is illegal. That's arson, right?
Right.
Actually,
Right.
arson, and people use this inappropriately. Arson is defined as fires set for gain. So
Okay.
if you want to hurt another business, that's arson. If you want to do insurance fraud, it's arson.
Okay.
Um, other fires are maybe set for other reasons, but that's really kind of what that's about. Yeah. So I mean, we try to maintain some professionalism and civility about the whole thing. One of the things that is true is fire got into the medical business in the 70s because probably because of a TV show, frankly, but um, we would do all this first aid training and learn how to do all kinds of exotic bandaging and all kinds of, building slings and all that good stuff. And the medics would show up, who were called attendants in those days. They show up and take all of that stuff off to get a better look at the injuries. So that was
Interesting.
kind of hard for morale, right? And it caused some bad feelings. But the truth is, they're the lead agency in a medical call. They don't have a role until there's a patient, mind you, but they're the lead agent in an agency in a medical call. So they're going to undo everything that you've done, and they will. My dearest friend was a medic, and it's something that it was a lot. It gave us some good stories, but
Yeah.
the reality is we are so in it together that there's no point having bad feelings, and you should always be happy to see a familiar face, because fire doesn't ever really deal with hostile folks. But I've been at scenes where people are hostile, and it's something that I don't want to say they don't deal with it. It happens, and anybody wearing navy blue, right? That's who they're mad at. So
Yeah.
you got to watch that.
Well, you use a term there. It's nice to see a familiar face. You get to know the different crews. You get to
Yeah,
know which fire crews working the night or that shift, or DAS, ambulance,
yeah,
paramedics.
yeah.
You get to know them after a while, and sometimes years and years later. When I became a police officer, so in 1999, 2000, around that time, I had to do my first aid course, and it
Mhm.
was from a paramedic who was
Oh yeah,
who was running first aid courses kind of on the side business. Great.
sure.
And I remember him. He was funny and he was inappropriate, and which was exactly what I needed. It
Yeah.
was almost 20 years later on the road that I actually ran into him at a
Oh,
call, and
nice.
it's funny how he impacted me for close to 20 years because of
Yeah,
some of the things he was saying about paramedics, and I was able
agreed.
to,
Agreed.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I took some higher level medical training at Seneca, and the instructors were the first from the first cadre of paramedics in Ontario.
Okay.
And we learned a ton of stuff. And you're right, they became buddies. So, again, we touch on the sleep deprived thing. Like, not everybody's in a good humor at work, and this is something that this cracks me up when people are in during the holiday season, right? And there's a police officer standing at their door on Christmas Eve. And they say, "Oh, come on, give me a break. It's Christmas Eve." And you go, "Yeah." And that guy's probably got a young family at home, and he's standing here looking at your stupid face with snow landed on his hat. Like, how much of a break do you think you're entitled to
I
when
know.
you're wrecking his Christmas, right? And
I know.
the other bit, back to when I say I'll tell funny stories, I have always taken the approach to this is that, whether you're a deep faith-based person or not, these jobs let us know how truly powerless we are in the grand scheme of things, and that, to me, is something that I look at the light side of stuff. The darker things are, the funnier they can seem, and that part of that's that dark humor. Some of it is absolutely a defense mechanism, but
Oh, absolutely.
that's why I'll only tell funny stories, and I don't tell. One of the reasons I ended up in therapy was I was telling a horror story, and I had a breakdown partway through it. I couldn't believe it, but
Yeah.
and the taxpaying public, and it's very much influenced by, frankly, U.S. media, and I'll give you the best example from your world, because I got to know many of these people through my peer support work, and also through doing group dynamics, is there is some sense in officer involved shootings that comes from the movies that something was a righteous shoot or a good shoot, and they pat the guy in the back, and they all go out for a few toddies after work, and all is well, and that's grand. Every copper I've ever known who's had to be in a shooting, it has ruined their lives,
Yeah.
and they have spent 10 to 20 or more years, as you say, in therapy, just trying to get back to their pre-shooting condition. Shooting people wrecks your life. And to think that it's you might think you have the capacity to do it, but boy, if you think that you can shoot somebody and be found not guilty or not responsible or whatever, and you think the other side of your head's going to leave you alone, there will always be a little voice that says, "Yeah, but you killed a guy."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's absolute nonsense to think that you can do that and get away with it. And it's very
Yeah.
true with so much of the stuff that we do on the job, is that you have to kind of, I always use the sandblaster analogy, right? You know, these little sandblaster boxes where you look through the window and you stick your hands in those little glove dealies.
Yeah.
You have to kind of approach some of the work you do that way. You're looking through a window and you're doing stuff with your hands, because in fire we need to hire people whose knowledge can come out of their hands, and you do the thing and you pull your hands out of the gloves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the scene, and this is where you are. You have to build some barriers to that, because, as I say, this will take chunks out of you. And one of the things I think is that, depending on how we're raised, and most of us come from awfully similar backgrounds, I find, having how do I frame this? The moral injury thing that I touched on before, and I hope over time we talk more about it. But one of the things that tears us up is seeing abused or neglected children. Most of us come from backgrounds that we didn't see that. There might have been a poor, dirty kid at school or something like that. But when you see children who are being abused or neglected, it makes a hole in your soul, because we think the role of adults is to protect children.
I
And
know.
you get out in the world and you find out that ain't true at all. Sometimes the people who are there to protect children come with lights and sirens,
I
right?
know. Listen, you actually, that was a perfect way to, we're going to probably wrap this up now,
Yeah,
but you gave me some great ideas for some of our next topics, our future discussions. And listen, Dave, this was great. We kind of went off rails about what we were
yeah,
originally talking to, but it was
yeah. We do
important
that.
to do so. And
Yeah,
I think this is great. So, uh, I'm gonna sign off, and I'm just gonna let people know if they want to learn more about Red Fridays and what we're doing about this podcast, and what you can do to support first responders or emergency services personnel, military
great
veterans
content.
across the country.
Yeah,
Please check out redfridaytalks.help. That's
and don't forget to subscribe.
redfridaytalks.help. subscribe to this channel.
Yeah.
And if there's something you would like us to cover, please leave a comment. We read every comment and we respond when it's appropriate to do so.
And
Dave,
somebody please ask why we don't let you drive over fire hoses at fire scenes. Somebody please ask me that.
we need to get to that. We need to
That's
get to that.
important. That's critical, Ed.
Yeah, awesome. Dave, thanks again, brother.
Always a pleasure, man. Talk to you soon.